Alrighty. Welcome back, folks, to another episode of the Midwatch Podcast. Today we are graced by the presence of Chief Petty Officer Steve McKinley.
Happy to be here.
Glad we finally got to actually sit down and do this. I know we've been talking for a few weeks now. I'm trying to figure out a time, so I'm happy we finally figured that out. But yeah, I'd just like to kind of kick right into the podcast. As I kind of told you before, obviously before you take over a watch on a ship, which you might not know about, you should know your 11 general orders, right? Before you stand a watch. But here on the Midwatch Podcast, we have the 11 general questions. Okay. And again, it's just, it's not designed to be like a conversation. Just first thing comes to your mind, spit it out. You know what I mean? Kind of
absolutely.
Rapid fire.
I'm used to doing that. Ask my wife.
And then, again, it's just to get the juices flowing, and then we'll kick off the podcast after that, all right?
Yep.
All right, question number 1, favorite superhero?
Superman.
I
have a tattoo, actually.
Question number 2, who would win in a cage fight, Chuck Norris or Bruce Lee?
Chuck Norris all day.
All right.
He's from Texas.
If you could raise one person from the dead and have them walk in the modern world, who would it be?
Wow. Wow. That's a big one.
You can think. You can, a few seconds. Doesn't need to be.
My grandfather.
Okay. What is your first car ever?
A 1995 green Dodge Neon. I called it the Frog.
If you could have dinner with one person, anyone in history, dead or alive, who would it be?
Tiger Woods.
That was quick. All right. If you could be any movie character, right? So, a character that's portrayed in a movie, not the actor themselves.
Okay.
Who in real life, who would it be?
Jason Bourne.
Okay. What is your favorite chick flick?
Favorite chick flick?
Yeah.
Oh, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
I feel like someone else has said that before. No one's ever said The Notebook, though, which is my personal favorite. The last scene in that movie gets me every time. Pick one. If you could only have one, honor, courage, or commitment.
Honor.
If all jobs paid the same, what would you do?
Stay-at-home dad.
That's good. That's respectable. I like that. If you were in an airport and the airline could give you one free ticket to go anywhere you'd want to go, where would it be?
Tennessee.
Specific area?
Knoxville.
Okay.
I love the lakes around there. I love the area. I love the hiking. I love nature. A place I can bring my family.
All right. And that, just clarify, it's anywhere in the world. Still.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
man.
right, I like it.
I bleed red, white, and blue.
I like it. Okay. All right, last one. What is one item on your bucket list?
One item on my bucket list.
Yep.
To be a father that my father was not.
I like it. All right, that concludes the 11 general questions. Right. You are allowed to be on the podcast.
Good. All right.
So yeah, man,
that was tough. Hey, that was tough.
That was it's all over the place.
Yeah,
right?
man, that was good. I liked it.
Superheroes, some deep questions.
I enjoyed it.
Cool, good. All right, so again, now that the blood's flowing to the brain a little bit, I like to always preference, kind of what the podcast is all about, right? So, all right, traditionally, back in the day, right, you'd have to wait on the History Channel or Discovery Channel to do some sort of documentary to learn or read a book about someone's story, right? But with the gift of technology, we can do it with an iPhone and a spare bedroom now, right? So, my goal with this podcast is just to have interesting people who I think stories deserves to be heard, and put it on the internet, so one day your kids can pull it up and listen to it whenever they want.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so that's the goal behind it. So as always, we will always start this one off. Again, the goal of this is for you to talk and me to just guide your story.
Yeah.
Right. But again, we're senior year of high school, sitting next to you in algebra class. Who are you?
Not a good kid. So senior year. So let's see. That's 2011. No, that's not 2011, is it? No, that's 2001. Okay. 2002. I'm a little older than that.
I was like, because I graduated in 08.
So 2001, of course, you had the Twin Towers and what happened at 9/11. My family at that time, which we can talk a little bit before that, were extremely religious. They were Southern Baptist, very liberal. I'm talking like, wearing jeans to the river 110 degrees outside. So I tried to do everything I could do to be rebellious. You know, kind of forced in the church, you know, twice on Sunday, every Wednesday, played the game on that part, but kind of wanted to be myself, and I didn't have that freedom because my father didn't allow it. Right. So I have a dad we can talk about later on, but my father, who's my stepfather now, and he's a great man, was kind of strict on us. So, I kind of walked that path, and kind of said who I was within the church and within that side, but then had a very rebellious side, that I hid. Just wasn't the greatest dude, you know. Had a lot of friends, or let me change that. I had a lot of acquaintances. Didn't have a whole lot of friends. But those people who were my acquaintances thought, you know, oh, this is friendship. So just, I didn't have a direction. I didn't really know where I was going to go. I really didn't know what I was going to do. I was kind of selfish. But people liked me because I could tell a joke every now and then. So, yeah.
So where's home? If you don't.
So home. So I was born in Dallas, Parkland Hospital downtown. So that makes me an extremely large Cowboy fan. Sorry. I apologize for you out there too. We grew up in and out of my grandmother's house out of Oak Cliff. Like I said, my dad was in and out of prison when I was really young, and we can go into that later. Then around about 6th grade, my father moved us to Venus, Texas. Population of 516. We lived out on a kind of a ranch type, 26 acres out of there. But I call home Waxahachie. That's where my brother lives, and that's where I'm going to end up retiring next year. So
that's still all in the Dallas.
Still in the Dallas area. Still about 20 miles south of Dallas. A little podunk, but getting kind of upper suburbia type. Yeah.
So going back to that year. So you said you graduated in 2001, right?
2002.
Oh, 2000. Okay, so you were in high school when 9/11 happened.
I
then.
was.
I love asking that question because again, being like I watched that happen with my own eyes, right? So it's I've come to notice as I've done this podcast that people have very like what I experienced that day is very different than like what other people in the country, right? Because I was 13 at the time, right? Like I just thought the world was my town, right? Like didn't really. So what was that day, right? Because I could tell you what I was wearing, like I could tell you everything about that day.
Yeah.
Like what do you recall?
Yeah. So we were sitting in school, and of course back then, it wasn't, the availability of information wasn't huge. It was all TV, right? So
right.
Of course they rolled the TV in. It was kind of astonishing, right? These are the things that you read about or you watch movies about, and they happen in foreign lands, right? That doesn't happen here. So it was kind of shocking. But like a lot of individuals at that time who joined because of it, again, I was selfish. It was kind of like, thank goodness that ain't happening to me, right? That sounds awful.
Yeah.
But that was the person I was then. And that was the feeling I had, like man, that really sucks, but I'm glad it's not me. And I didn't have that forceful push to be like, I need to defend it. Did I later and look back on it? Absolutely. I was like, man, that was a pivotal point in our history. And I probably should have felt a little bit, you're good. I probably should have felt a little bit differently, then. But yeah, I mean, I've been asked that question a few times, and really it comes back to how selfish I was at that time, that I really wasn't like beyond more than what I was, if that makes sense.
Okay. So did you kind of switching back? So did you play any sports or anything in high school?
Yeah. So I played. We went to a small school, of course, so everything was available. So I pretty much played everything. I wasn't allowed to play basketball because it was during baseball season.
Gotcha.
I'm not really vertically challenged, so basketball wasn't really in it. I enjoyed to play it though. So yeah, I grew up playing football. I grew up playing baseball in small towns. We all grew up together. I mean, with a population of our town of about 500, we all knew each other, right? Cool thing about our high school was the high school population was about 500, right?
Oh, okay.
That's because there was smaller towns around us that didn't have schools, right? So they
send
came
them all in.
Right. It was an hour bus ride for me to get to school every day.
Oh, wow.
Right, an hour there, an hour back, because that's how spread out in the country we were. So yeah, and you basically tried out for the team. You made the team. But yeah, I played high school at Venus High School. We were 2A at the time, super small, so we had to travel a lot. Sometimes 2.5 hours to go play a team if you were away. So I grew up. I played football, played some free safety. I was really into baseball. I was really, pretty good, but it got to a point to where I played so much of it that I was like, man, I'm kind of done playing for a while. But I kind of just played everything. My wife, I play sports now. I play flag football. I play, I'm almost 40, and I play softball. And my wife's like, man, why are you good at everything, right? But I also grew up with, because my family also lived out there on that 26 acres, and I had probably 5, 6, 7 boy cousins, and we were all, within about 4 years of each other. So when we weren't playing at school, we were playing at home. Depending on what time frame it was, we were either playing football, we were playing baseball. We were always doing something as a family. And what made it really lucky is that I talk about my dad and I talk about my father. So my father is my stepfather. I grew up with his family more than I grew up with my family. So when people are like, blood's thicker than water, like, not really to me, because those I grew up with them. They are my blood, and I was happy to do it, and I was happy to grow up with them. And I'm
what age that? Cause I'm pretty similar. So my stepfather came into my life when I was 8. So pretty similar situation. What year did that happen for you?
Yeah, so I'll tell a little backstory on that. So I could do the math, but so when I was really young, I remember at least when I was 4 or 5, my mother was a single mother. I have an older brother. I have 3 brothers now, but my brother's 4 years older than I was. And I remember because my dad, my biological dad, he was in and out of prison when I was young. So he ended up passing away in prison when I was 8. But he was in and out. I barely knew the guy. I didn't know who he was. I was raised by my mother. She was a single mother. You can't do it now, but I was 4 or 5 years old. My brother's 8 or 9 years old, and we cooked ourselves dinner. We walked ourselves to school, walked ourselves back because my mother was working. She was supporting the family and wouldn't come home till late. So I had to kind of grow up with my brother being kind of the father figure of my life. My father, Dennis, came into our lives when I was about 5.
Okay.
My mother was super young, so had my brother when she was 16, had me when she was 20. So she had 2 kids by the time she was 20, and she was a single mother, right? So Dennis came into our lives. We call him Dink. So when people look at me and my father, so my father's 6'3", 200, when he in his prime, 230 pounds, right? And people are like, "What is happening?" Just blonde hair, blue eyes, and they're like, "What happened?" And then I tell them,
right.
But he's my father. So he came to our lives, and my parents were still young, so they liked to party and all that kind of stuff. But he brought that stability into our home that a father figure was, and I think it was kind of tough on him because he knew he took that kind of weight on his shoulders. Like, man, now I'm gonna raise these kids.
Did he bring any kids to that?
No,
okay.
He didn't. So he didn't bring any kids. So that was huge, right? It's like, wow, this guy kind of stepped in our lives. And we can kind of go later on into they were kind of party animals. When I first met him, he drove. I think he drove a 1987 Z28 Camaro hatch, like just right. He had a perm, right? And then he went to the other side of super religious, and there was a reason behind that. But it couldn't have been easy for him to come in and be like, now I got to raise these 2 boys, right? And then also me and my brother, my older brother, we have different fathers, and my younger brothers have different fathers because they're from Dennis. They're from my father. So we were all half brothers, but man, it took a lot of years, but we're super close.
Gotcha. Very cool. So you graduated in 2002.
Yep.
All right. And then what did Did you try to go to college to play baseball?
So got some offers, and I was just kind of like, burnt out, kind of like, not a whole lot was going on with there. Again, I wasn't the smartest kid. College kind of wasn't my thing. I ended up working a construction job. And I was making decent money, and then they offered for people to work at DFW Airport. Well, if you work on federal as a contractor or construction worker, at federal, you get what's called James Bacon, which means you make at that time I think minimum wage was like 7 something, right? But if you work on federal, you made like $15.75 an hour, right? Which was huge back then, right? For sure. That was massive. By then, which we can go into, I was living on my own because I'd moved out, and I had an apartment. Man, I was making all this money. I was working like 60 hours a week, so that was time and a half on top of that. And I had grown up in that kind of strict lifestyle. Kind of went crazy, right? Booze, girls, kind of whatever I wanted, no direction. So yeah, that was kind of 2002 into 2003. And just no direction. And that's when actually a buddy of mine, JJ, he was like, "Hey man, let's join the Navy." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, man, let's join the Navy. Let's go be SEALs." And back then, they had a program where you and a buddy could go into the Navy. You could go to boot camp together. You could go into whatever A school you did, C school, whatever you did, go to and then go through your first command together, right? So it was like your cool. Boys could join you, right? And I was like, yeah, let's do this. So I went and signed up, and JJ didn't, right? And I'm like, okay, right? So I'm stuck in this contract.
So it was your idea.
Yeah. But I really joined, and it wasn't just because of JJ. It's the construction world. At that time frame, I saw guys that were like in their mid-30s, and they looked like they were in their 50s. Yeah. They were selling their tools and selling whatever they do to get booze and drugs, and then when they get paid, they were they were
broke the next day.
Yeah, broke the next day. And even I knew a guy I worked with. He was a foreman for me. His name was Kevin, and he was an old Navy SEAL. Had this big pot belly, had this real bad twitch, and he worked construction. I was just like, man, like, what am I going to do with my life? Like, I don't have any plans, like, but I can't do this. I can't be like this this guy, broken, in the mid 30s. So it was kind of a blessing that I was like, all right, let me, I mean, it took me a few months, of course, to get in the Navy,
right?
Because I wasn't the greatest guy and I was partying. But yeah, it was, I look back and it was the greatest decision I've ever made.
What age was this?
So I was 19.
Oh, okay. So you're still,
right.
Okay. So not that far removed from high school.
Yeah, okay. Not that far removed from high school. But still, I had some life experience out of high school, and kind of just realized, man, I need to change the direction. I need some purpose.
So did you look into any other branches?
Yeah,
like
so
that,
yeah,
or
I did. So, and we can go into the history of my mom later. So my mom was really sick when I was young. I would say early teens, pre-teens. My mom was really sick, and she got better later on. Like I said, we can go into what my mom means and what her struggles have been in her life. So being like modern medicine kind of saved her life. I was like, man, I want to do some medicine, right? But I was like, but I'm going to go to the Marine Corps, right? So I go to the Marine Corps the recruiting office, and I walk in, and they're like, the recruiters are recruiters. Hey man, what's up? And they're like, what do you want to do, right? And we'll keep it short. What do you want to do? I was like, man, I want to do medicine. They're like, we don't do medicine.
Only branch that doesn't.
I was like, we don't do medicine. I was like, okay. They're like, you want to shoot machine guns? I was like, yes, I want to shoot machine guns. They're like, you want to be a machine gunner? And I was like, you know what? I really want to do medicine. And they're like, you want to shoot machine guns and you want to do medicine? I said, yes. And I walked out, or he walked me out of the recruiting station. The Navy recruiting station was right next to it. And he walks in, he points at a recruiter, and he goes, Corpsman, and walks out. Right? And then that's when I found out about the buddy program. I talked to my buddy JJ, and we're like, let's do this, Of course, we had a lot of conversations, like, drunk conversations, like, yeah, let's do it. And then kind of, never
Wake up the next morning.
Yeah, wait till the next morning. Yeah, figure it out. So that was our introduction, or that was my introduction. And then he was just like, one day, let's do it. And I was like, yeah, let's go be SEALs. And I was like, all right. So I joined, and I went that path, and yeah.
So kind of going back to that time, right? Again, how you mentioned like information wasn't very fluent, right? And I'm sure as a 18, 19-year-old living on your own, I'm sure Fox News probably wasn't what was on your TV.
Oh, absolutely not.
So
absolutely not.
Did you have any idea of like what was kind of like because the wars are starting, stuff like that? Like, did any of that kind of play?
So it really didn't.
Or you're just a young teenager
I was young. I was having fun. I had a girlfriend at the time, but I wasn't worried about any of that. It was just, let me go do this thing with my life, and figure it out and see if I could do something different. Some people had these callings from, either 9/11 or their family was in it, right. Or to me it was, and I didn't know it at the time, to me it was just me seeking a way out, seeking a way to do something else besides what I was doing. So I was in boot camp, and they were like, oh, you're going to be a corpsman and you're a SEAL guy. Like, you're going to war. I was like, I joined the Navy. I'm going to be on a ship. And they were like, no, you're not. They're like, you are 19 years, you're 19 years old. You are going to Iraq. And I kind of freaked out. I was like, no, I'm not, but yeah, definitely that's where I went,
So all right, let's not jump too far ahead.
Yeah.
That's going to be the good part of the podcast. Okay, so you was DEP, was that still a thing back then? Delayed entry program?
Delayed entry program.
Wait a little bit,
yeah,
right?
You had to wait a little bit, and it wasn't that long. It was probably like 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
And then you kind of went in. So, and what was cool about that is back then DEP accrued your time in. So,
interesting.
Yeah, so it kind of accrued. I mean, your ADSD was kind of the same, but it kind of accrued your time. And so my ADSD is 2004, but my dates kind of convert to 3. So it's kind of different back then.
So you shipped out 2004. What month?
May, March.
Okay. So you didn't. Yeah, I went there in January. It was disgustingly cold.
Yeah, Great Lakes. Yeah.
All right. So what was that like? Right. So especially small town.
Yeah.
Right. And then you get off the traditional off the bus, getting yelled at. Like, what was your first initial thought? Like,
so my expectations weren't really too high or too low, because I didn't have people that really were like, oh, this is what you're going to see, this is what you're going to do. So my expectations were kind of like, all right, this is what we're doing, right? So I showed up, and of course you go through P days, and that first night in my rack, I was like, dude, I'm doing 4 years of this, and I'm getting out. Right? People yelling. I had just been on my own. I was making, money, what I thought was good money then. Right. And, I was paying my bills plus more. And now I'm getting to this, and I'm like, people were like yelling at me for just like looking at them. Like
sharing showers with people.
This is day, night one. I'm like, this 4 years, I am done. But yeah, it was like awakening. Like, man, this is what I got myself into. Do I really want this? And at the time I was like, no. It's like, I don't want people yelling at me all the time and constantly watching what I'm doing and other people watching what I'm doing. And it was an awakening that I thought was like, all right, here I am, here's what I'm going to do, to like, do I want to do this anymore? Right? Yeah.
All in one night. So any other like funny stories or anything you can recall from boot camp, or it
was such a long time ago, and I remember my rack mate we used to pay him, because we used to have like these booklets, right? You don't have money, right? So it's like these booklets, and we pay him like phone minutes or something to shine our boots, all right? Because he was really good at it. He always was like, look at, why aren't your boots like his? I was like, oh, they will be. Watch me pay him in this chit thing, and I'll get my boot shiny too. So he was up there like 30 pairs of boots, right? Or you wake up in the middle of the night, and back then we still had dungarees, right? So it was the light blue top with a dark bottom, and they always wanted the 3 lines in the back and the 2 lines in the front, and you don't get starch or anything else. So you're learning things like, hey, if you use your armpit deodorant, it acts just like starch. And you're like, okay, right? So everyone smells like Old Spice as we're walking around. Yeah.
funny.
So
I've never heard that.
Actually, I mean, now that I think about it, I was in boot camp and I woke up, when growing up, we didn't have a whole lot of money. So like dentists and things weren't a thing. And I go to the dentist and I'm like, hey man, your wisdom teeth can be taken out. And I'm like, okay, I don't even know what those are yet, but okay, take them out.
I have those?
Yeah, I feel dumb already. Go ahead and take them out. And so like I go in there and there's these two gigantic DTs that are like, and this doc is like ripping my teeth out. And I'm like, holy shit, this is crazy. And I get back to my room and of course they put you on light duty. They put you on SIQ. And when they put me on SIQ, they also give you pain meds. Right, so you're eating your yogurt or whatever you can eat, and you're popping Vicodin, and you're doing your thing till your SIQ's over. Well, I don't know how, but I got put on the watch wheel from balls to 0-2, and I was like, "Hey, I'm on Vicodin right now." I don't think, and they were like, figure it, and they were like, I was like, I have a no standing chit for try to play that game, right? I'm gonna be smart. They were like, well, then you can do your watch in a chair. And I was like, okay. So I'm sitting there, right? I wake up, and they wake me up, and I sit in my watch. I'm probably 15 minutes in, and what are you gonna do? I fall asleep. I'm like, I'm out. And I wake up, and I'm like, oh, what's going on? And we had this short MM2. He was one of our RDCs, and he was like, good morning, sunshine. And I was like, oh. I was like, this is gonna be bad.
Fuck.
Right? And our chief was it wasn't an LN. If I can't remember what the rate was, but I looked it up later on, and he made books. That was his job in the Navy. It was like making books. And if I knew now, I'd go back to boot camp. I'd whoop that guy, right? But he sends me to, and back then you could send them to what this was called SIL IT. Right, they send you because this was like just when Liberty Hall kind of was built, and you could still go to the track, and it was right. Well, what they do is they send these SEALs over, and they just beat you down for like hours, right? And apparently, you're not supposed to pass this the first time. So I get there, and it's me and another guy. And I'm like, hey, how many times is this for you? He's like, man, this is my 4th time, because I haven't. The past 3 times I haven't passed it.
Oh, they send you to this?
Oh, yeah, they send you.
I thought you meant like the SEALs came to your compartment.
They send you, and then the SEALs meet you there.
Oh, God, okay.
Right, or the Divemo guys or whoever they are. Right, you don't know any different because you're
right. Yeah.
Because this was before, now in boot camp, you got one big building and your classrooms in there, chow hall. This was you had to march all over base, and you had to go everywhere you went. So I get there, the dude takes me there. And he's like, yeah, man, this is my 4th time. He's like, I failed the last 3 days. And I'm like, he's like, is that hard? I was like, yeah, it's hard. I'm like, oh, God. All right. So they come up there and they start yelling at you. And they're like, you get 3 strikes. If you're not loud enough, if you don't push hard enough, if anything's wrong, you'll get a strike. You get 3, you go away, you come back the next day until you can succeed. And I was like, okay, so I'll just be belligerent, right? And I was loud, and I did all this stuff, and it's like 3 hours later, right? By the end of it, I'm running around this track, and I have a corpsman with a backboard following me because I'm like, I can't even stand up, right? I'm like, and I end up passing, right? And I go back, and the chief's there, and I walk in his office. He's like, when do you need me back tomorrow? I was like, Chief, I don't need you back tomorrow. I passed. He got super mad, and he threw his coffee mug through the glass and hit our yeoman in the eye. Yeah, busted his eye open. So after that, the CEO of our ship, which was the building we were living in, made that chief write an apology letter to our entire division, apologizing. Oh, wow. He hated me. Oh, he hated me for the rest of the time there. I got beat all the time. Wow. So yeah, that's the most vivid story I can really remember. At a boot camp.
I don't think I've ever asked this question. I never really thought about it. It just kind of clicked in my head. Since you were there, kind of at like the start of like the war, was there anything like that they added to boot camp to like talk about that, or is it just regular?
No, not
regular
really.
Boot camp? No?
Yeah, no, not really. They didn't really add anything. You know, from what I hear, battle stations at the ends kind of changed since Universal kind of took that over and did some things within it.
So you had the old one where you had to like run around the base.
Yeah,
all
you
night.
had to run to the Marlin Spike. You had to run to the DC. You had to run all over the base, right? Warriors night, or Warriors breakfast after that, and you got your hat that said sailor on it, and everyone called you shipmate. You cried, but yeah, no, there wasn't any really preference because it was so early. It was so early in the war, right?
True.
Yeah, there was, and back then, like corpsmen, like now, there are quite a few corpsmen that go as RDCs. There wasn't any there because everyone was called, right? You have your numbers. Now that I'm older and I know, a battalion runs at 65 at wartime and run at 92. So they all were shipped out. Like they all had things to do. So there wasn't really any change for that.
So you graduate boot camp, obviously. At that time, Corps School was still up in Great Lakes, right?
Yep.
So you just kind of
marched
across the street.
Marched across the street. I got the weekend. My parents came up with my girlfriend at the time. Came up to see my graduation, and then it was weird. I went from having zero freedom. I checked into the quarterdeck, and they're like, "All right, I'll see you on Monday." And I was like, "You mean I can just go do whatever?" Like, like, okay, right?
I remember that exact moment for myself too.
So I spent I think I spent a day or two with them, and then I had a day on my own, and then I don't think I may have had a week in between until we classed up.
So what was were you still energetic at that point to kind of get into medicine? And
kind of what had happened in boot camp kind of changed who I was. So when I joined boot camp, because I was working construction, you don't eat the healthiest foods, and I was just kind of doing what I wanted as a young kid. I came in pretty heavy. I came in kind of on a weight waiver. I was too big to join, but they're like, "You're going to be a corpsman, right?" And I'm talking like 17-minute mile and a half, right? But then being at boot camp, and it wasn't the hardest, but it made me put effort, right? And then instead of growing up in Texas where sports, like, you're supposed to be good at it and there's not a whole lot of pats on the back, it was like being dedicated, I became one of the faster guys and one of this and that, and having those individuals like, "Man, good job," like, it made me want to do, it made me want to be better, right? And kind of push. And then I, of course, with buds being the things, that's something I wanted to do, it was, man, I better get fit. If I don't want to fail because I wasn't fit, so I really got into the whole mindset, like, fitness is, it's not a token, it's a lifestyle. Like, you gotta stay committed to it, right? Which is why, I've been in the gym now for, steadily coming up on 18, 19 years, of just, being in that mindset. Like, I don't want to be that person that I was. I mean, I remember I was 12 years old and I went to a water park, and there was a kid bullying another kid, and I said something, and the kid goes, "What are you going to do about it, fatty?" And I took that, right? I didn't go to another water park till I was 25, right? But I was like, you know what? Fitness is a thing I can do. I'm pretty good at it. And I just kind of went on from there.
How long was Corps School back then?
2 months. 3-4 months. Yeah, it's about the same as it is now. Like I said, I don't remember a whole bunch. There's people that can remember. I can't, man. I kind of leave it in the background.
Were you there for the self-paced thing?
So self-paced came in right after I left.
Okay.
Self-paced came, and we had heard about it, and I was one of those guys, which I wasn't super smart growing up, and I was like, that's not something that I want to do.
Yeah.
So,
So where was so you graduate Corps School, right? Where did you Where'd you go to first?
Coronado.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Sorry.
So you during core school you do your dive mo stuff, right? And you're dive motivator, and then you now we run what's called an ATF program, which is kind of built to help the kids that are going to recon, SMT, and dive. It's like a prep course, right? So we actually, there's stuff you can and can't do, but you're getting them ready for the events that are gonna happen. Back then, it was like they just beat us every day for like 2 hours. Like there was nothing, no rhyme or reason. Like I remember one time the Senior Chief Constantine. If you know who Constantine is, way back in the day, there used to be a Navy poster, and it was a guy with a surfboard, and it was like accelerate your life. That was Senior Chief Constantine, and he could do like 100 pull-ups in a row. Like this guy was a monster. So like one day he brings us out there. He's like, he's like, what are we doing today? He's like, we're doing pull-ups. And we're like, all right. We did pull-ups for 2 hours. We like people got rhabdo. Like it was awful. Like there was no rhyme or reason by what it was just whatever they felt like we were doing. Carrying logs one day, doing something another day. It was pretty wild, man.
That was in Coronado, or this
that was in Great Lakes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was in Great Lakes. But yeah, then we go to, you show up to Coronado and you do your check-in, and I made it 3 weeks in, and then just couldn't do it anymore, man. It was ring the bell sort of thing. My body was hurting. It was a different type of pee. It was a different type of attitude. It was just, it takes a special type of person to do it. Like if I look back, but my mindset was different then, right? It was, what was easy for me. What was easy for life. I try to wake up now and every day do something hard, but back then it was like, man, this is hard. I don't want to do it anymore. Cause I was a young kid. I was a young punk kid that really didn't appreciate things, and, kind of quit on myself. Right. But I look back at it, and was it a blessing? I think it was, because a lot of the guys that joined in that time frame and were in that program, I mean, honestly, they're either dead or they're out, right? And I owe the Navy and what it's built for me, not only as a culture within myself, but the attitude in which I can raise my kids and I can be a decent human being. I owed it a lot. So, am I upset with myself that I did it? Sure, because it was always, man, it's something that I failed at. But it's also like I'm glad that young punk made that decision, even though it probably wasn't the best one. It probably sent me down a path that was much better.
So what was the transition period like from, because you're already a corpsman at that point, right?
Yeah.
So, because SEAL wasn't even a rate back then, right?
So SOs now it was like a C school, right?
Right.
Like you earn your trident, and you have that NEC, but you're still a corpsman.
You're still your rate,
yeah.
right?
Because now it's like you go to SO, and once you graduate there, they kind of send you to the field that they need you at. So
what was were you on like holding long there, or since you already had a rate, it was probably...
Yeah, so it was pretty easy then because the need of the Navy, right?
Right.
What was the need? The need was go to war. So yeah, they didn't have any problem sending me to what's called FMTB now, but it was Field Medical Service School, Camp Johnson, North Carolina. So I went there. That was a little bit different. You think you're a hot shot going on the buzz, like, oh, I'm this cool guy. But yeah, going there, and again, kind of every place I've been to, I've kind of trying to just redeem myself, right, from past failures. So going there, man, I had a great time in FMSS. I met some great people. There are a lot of individuals out there that I'm gonna say a lot. There are a few that I still talk to. There's still a few that are still in. Chris Sexton. Chief Sexton, we went to FMSS together. So there's still a few of us out there that haven't quite retired yet, that I went there with. But that was where, like, man, this is why I joined, right? And not knowing like the feeling of what they teach you there is basic Marine Corps stuff. And before then, TCCC, Tactical Combat Casualty Care, didn't exist.
Right.
It was field medicine, but we were using Vietnam tactics, Vietnam medicine, Vietnam gear. Like the thing about war was what it does is it makes medicine improve. Right. Look at Israel. They're great at medicine because they've been at war forever.
Yeah, they're always under attack.
Yeah. So
I had a H1 John O'Hara, and he explained he went to the FMSS, and the way he explained he said the same thing you just did, right? Like it was all Vietnam because nothing had happened since then. Really, he said it was. He felt like he was in the TV show MASH.
Yeah,
that's
everything was right.
Yeah.
Our schoolhouse was out of an old chapel. Now it's nice over there. Now the chapel's still there, but they don't use it they have a building now. But it was cool. I mean, you had your platoon. You had 4 platoons that you did, and you kind of went with your platoon through your classes. You had a corpsman instructor. My corpsman instructor was HM2 Testa, who's now retired Master Chief Testa. My Marine liaison, because you have a corpsman and a Marine liaison, it was Staff Sergeant Lister. His call sign was Earlobe. So we found out later on he was in Desert Storm, and he got caught trying to take earlobes back to the States. Like, this guy was freaking psycho. But like the hard Marine from like Full Metal Jacket, like that's him. Like he just like constantly was just pushing us to go further and harder. So I appreciated it. Right. And that was kind of I played sports growing up, and you build like a camaraderie, but that was like my first, like, this is a brotherhood. This is somebody that's always going to have your back and always going to help push you and always going to kind of make you better. And I don't know if it was my platoon or just the time frame. It's like we picked each other up. All right. We went out together. We watched each other's backs, and it was just my first introduction to a real like the fraternity that they call the Navy and the Marine Corps. And I loved it. Right. So that really ingrained that kind of green side into me.
What year are we in?
04.
Okay, so this is like right after we went to Iraq,
yeah.
Right? That was 2003.
Yeah.
So is that kind of what the mindset was in that school? It's like, hey,
yeah, so
you're a male, you're going kind of thing?
That was the big mindset change, right? So nowadays people go to FMTB and they'll go to a hospital, or they'll go to what used to be called FSSG, which is now MOG. We were all going to division. Like everyone was going to go, and a bunch of my buddies, Chris Hawkins went to 2nd Reg, and all this. I ended up going to 7th Reg, which was 29 Palms, California. Right. So, think about being in North Carolina with like the pines and all this stuff, and then being put into 29 Palms, California. Right. So, if you don't know, 29 Palms used to be an Army base like 100 years ago. Well, the Army pulled out of it, and they said, they were like, why did they pull out? They were like, this base, no one needs to be here. This place is uninhabitable. So the Marine Corps came in and put a base there, right?
We got it.
Watch this, right? So I ended up going to there. So my first day showing up, we had to fly into Palm Springs, and I flew in mid-afternoon. I called the duty, and they're like, you got to make your own way here. I'm like, okay. So I call a cab, and it's like a $200 cab ride, right, from Palm Springs. And I'm an HR, right? I'm an E1. And I get there, and I show up to the quarterdeck, and they're like, hey, all right, you're going to be in 2-7, War Dogs, right? And I get my barracks room, and these are the old barracks. They're not an enclosed building, so your hatch looked out, right? And I was on the 3rd deck, and I'm like, and I look out, and I'm like, I see lights and stuff. I'm like, man, this ain't too bad, right? That's cool, man. And I wake up the next morning, and I kind of get on the catwalk, and there's just desert. And I'm like, where am I right now? Like, what did I get myself into? What's going on? So that was my introduction to like my first duty station. I was like, this is going to be crazy. Right? This is going to be just out of control.
So checking in there, what was the mentality like there?
So you're looking at, so now there's a mandatory 1 year dwell time. So back then it was 6 months dwell time. So you were doing 6, 7, 8 month deployments, coming back for 6 months, going back. So you were just racking and stacking, rinsing and repeating, right? And so it was high volume. It was high volume training. It was, I mean, I checked in. So I checked in that next day to 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, and I walk in the back door into the BAS, and the corpsmen, they had just come back from deployment, and they looked at me like I was a buffet. Like they were like, "Who is the new people?" Right? And I remember walking past this guy, HM3 Leomo, and he looks at me. He goes, "If you ain't weapons company, you ain't shit." And I was like, "Okay." So you get introduced to the chief, and so I sit down with Chief Crane, who's retired Master Chief Crane now, and they do the chief thing. They talk to you and kind of figure out who you are, and then he was like, "Well, what do you want to do?" And boom, that little whisper went in my ear, and I was like, "I want to go to weapons company." He's like, "Why?" I said, "Well, I heard if you ain't weapons company, you ain't shit." And he put me in weapons company, right? So my introduction to the battalion aid station and to the people that had already gone and had come back from a pretty tough deployment, from what I heard previously and heard stories about later, was like, I was like, man, we better start with a hair on fire, because if you don't, what's going to happen next? So it was a lot of young men who had to grow up really fast and become really hard really quick, right? So yeah.
Just for reference for myself and for people listening, so you went with division, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's 3 places you can go, right? MLG, the Marine Air Wing, or division,
yep.
Right? And within division, there's different kind of sectors, right? Weapons company is one.
Yeah, so weapons company is a part of the company within a battalion. Right, so you have 3 infantry units or 3 infantry companies, and then you have your weapons company within a battalion. You can go other places in division. So you can go LAR. You used to go to tanks, no longer exist. You can go to ARTI. But everything else is, recon's a part of the division, but back then it was, or even now they're kind of separate, but not, because you have to go to BRC. And other things. But yeah, you had your FSSG, which is now MLG, your Marine Logistics Group, right? So hot dogs and soda, that's who brings you your food. That's who gives you your bullets. They always say, hey, you wouldn't have your bullets without us. Good to go, whatever. They're still pogues, they're not grunts, right? And then you had your air wing, right? I've never experienced any side just division. That's all I've ever done in my career, mostly by choice on that.
So how fast, or I guess what was like your first week there, like kind of getting into the groove of things?
It was pretty wild, man, because the expectations of you as a corpsman are very high, right? I tell a lot of people, like, I've been a mother to Marines for 17 years. Right, because they ask things of you right off the bat, right? It's that inherent trust that they have just because you're a corpsman, right? So I remember it might have been the first night after I'd been in the battalion, and I'm in my room, and of course I'm trying to square everything away, make sure everything looks nice, because I just got yelled at for like months at FMSS for not having my bed made and stuff, and so I'm trying to square my stuff away, and I could knock on the door. And I answer it. I forget who it was, but they're like, "Hey, you're the new doc, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Come with me." And I'm like, "Cool. What's up?" So I walk into this room, and there's a guy laying on the floor next to a mattress that's on the floor. And I'm like, "What's going on?" He's like, "We're playing Space Monkeys, and he missed the mattress, and now he won't wake up." And I was like, "What is Space Monkeys?" And he goes, "It's when you choke somebody against the wall until they pass out, and then they fall." And he missed the mattress and he hit his head. And I'm like, wow. All right. So I go, and of course he's breathing. He wakes up and he's a little dizzy. And back then it wasn't like, oh, let's call 911. It's like, you all right, dude? Because we ain't telling anybody that this just happened, right? So that was like my first introduction, like of doing Navy medicine in And because back then, we joke about it. Barracks medicine was real, right? I kept a stack of IVs in my wall locker. I'd have guys come to me on the weekends like, "Hey doc, like I need an IV." Like, bam, I'm throwing IV. I got like 6 guys in my room just hanging, But that was barracks medicine. That's what we did because, again, there's no DHA, there's no all these guidelines, right?
Yeah.
It was.
And that you said like that expectation, like that. That's one of the things I enjoy most, like appreciate most about being a corpsman is, because like I see it on the ship with other rates, not so much as what I'm sure it is like a Marine, but like they just know that you're doc, right?
Yeah.
These young kids, they don't know the difference between an MD, a fucking PA, a nurse.
No, there's a difference. There is a difference, right? So
I'm saying like they don't know that. They hear doc.
Some of them do though, right? So that's funny that you say that because the younger Marines, they were like doc, right?
Right.
The older Marines that already done a tour, I got put in a platoon. I got put in a MAP 2 Bravo, and we can talk about the structure of that later on compared to what it is now. I got called corpsman my first year. Corpsman, come here. Corpsman, do that. And I was like, man, what? And it wasn't till we got back from our first deployment that they were like, good job, doc.
Gotcha.
And I was like, whoa, right? Like, whoa. But these were guys that, I mean, they were a year older than me. Mm-hmm. But I had such respect for them because they held themselves in such a different way. And it wasn't because they had grown up differently. It wasn't because, they had gone to a different boot camp, which they did. They were Marines. It wasn't that. It was these young men went to war, right? And had to grow up and live some tough times, and then came back with an expectation that they were going to do it again, mm-hmm. right? They knew they were going to do it again.
They knew it, yeah.
So they knew what type of character needed to be there for them to come home. So watching these guys that I totally respected, and I think about it now, they weren't much older than me, but man, it was like they were, man, they'd seen it, they'd done it, and they were just, it was boys becoming men based on situations that no one wants to do.
And as far as like, how you said like the turn and burn, it was much faster back then.
Oh,
like, was that the same expectation? Because again, I'm speaking of ignorance here. I've never been on that side of the corpsman world. When you get assigned to like these divisions and regiments, platoons, are you shifted differently than like they are? So like, or are you with them the whole time? So you're every 6 months you're going as well too.
Oh yeah.
Or
I was attached to 2nd Battalion 7 Marines for 3.5 years.
Okay.
Three pumps out of there, man. So I was with the same company, same platoon, and then of course I got promoted and became the senior line corpsman of that company. But yeah, you're with them the whole. You come back, you're with them. You go deploy, you're with them. You come back, you're with them. You're with that unit the whole time.
Okay.
It's not any different than now. Deployments are different now, of course. Kind of the senior guys, the first classes and the chiefs, they kind of get moved around within a battalion. Back then, it wasn't. I mean, your chiefs would get moved a little bit, but everyone was together for 3 years. Like we were you'd have some guys that were older roll out, but new guys. But there was a group of about 30 of us that were with each other as corpsmen the whole time.
I'm sure that's very important, especially back then. That good,
yeah, and then there was groups of hundreds of, because your battalion's running at about 1,100, 1,100. There's hundreds of us that spent all that time together. Like, you didn't spend time with everyone because some of them went to Echo Company, Fox Company, Golf Company, but the guys that came to weapons, I mean, you spent three plus years with these dudes, doing deployments. You knew them, like you knew who they lost their virginity to. You knew
right.
You talk about dumb thing. You knew where they went to high school, and they drew the high school out for you. Like, hey, this is where I went to this, and this was like, you knew everything. Yeah. So we spent a lot of time together back then.
So you check in. How far from you checking in? Because I guess you said they got back right before you got there.
Yeah. So they had been back. I would say about 2 months. So I was on deck for about 4 months, and we deployed.
Okay. So like workups weren't really a thing, or is it just much shorter workups?
So that's the thing about workups were workups, but they were.
Or were they not even a thing back then?
They were, but like things like Mojave Viper that's out there in Twine Palms, they didn't exist, right? CAX existed, but what was CAX? Us driving our trucks back there and shooting a bunch of shit and driving back. Like that's all. Like we ran some lane drills and we did some other stuff and we did some CQB and went some other training. Like nowadays, since they were at war for 20 years,
right.
They things like EOTG was grown to where you have to fulfill these requirements before deployment. Like there were requirements back then, but it was like, hey dude, we got 6 months, let's go.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a lot of learning in deployment. Right. Because a lot of those tactics and AARs that they had developed were built off of our deployments, and then the workups then were built off of what happened.
Knowledge.
What happened in the past.
Where did you go first, Iraq or Afghanistan?
Iraq.
Yeah. So what? Again, kind of keep the time frame. Where are we at now? 2005.
So late 2004. Okay. So we're in heat.
Okay.
Right outside of Al Assad. Yeah, that was crazy because we also embedded and helped out the pushes in through Fallujah. And I talk about the expectations of what I had when I went through and the level of medicine, right, that I needed. Being a combat corpsman is not hard. The level of knowledge that you need to be a combat, Marine Corps corpsman, boots on deck in division, is not that hard, right? Because you're limited on your gear because you can only carry so much stuff, which doesn't limit you on your knowledge, but it limits you on what you can and can't do, right? So I try to tell these kids now, like being a corpsman on TRIC level is very easy, but it's knowing the algorithm, it's knowing what to do, it's knowing the bubble chart. When the bubble says no, you go here. When the bubble goes here, you say yes, and not contradicting yourself whether it's yes or no, right? So it's not hard, and it's super easy medicine, but when all the other things come in, it's why it makes it hard, right? The thoughts that you have, the individual that you're working on, the closeness that you have with them, that those thoughts run through, and you kind of got to boot that out and reboot yourself in. What's going on around you, the situation itself, right? Are you still in a firefight? What's happening? Like there's so much stuff that's happening that can throw you off of that basic medicine that you need to know. That's what makes it hard, right? That's what makes a good corpsman and a bad corpsman. It's not, you all know the same stuff. You've all learned the same stuff. It's how can you do that very well in a situation that completely sucks, right? Because you hear it all the time. Sucks to suck, nerd, right? Because it does,
yeah,
right. And that's what made us back then so good, and it was because a lot of us saw those hard guys that had just lived that one deployment. They came back and they were so different, and you were like, man, I'm about to get in it, right? So yeah, medicine's like that. Medicine's not hard. It's dealing with the situations and being proficient in that situation and doing it.
So what was the right? You're on the plane flying. Did you do the traditional?
Yes. No. So
Germany
we flew to what did we fly to? Dublin. We flew to Dublin. Got off the plane, but we didn't leave the airport. Got back on the plane. Flew into Kuwait. Then Kuwait. We stayed in Kuwait for I would say about a week. Which they called acclimatization or whatever they wanted to call it. And it was just your pre-stage. And then we flew on C-130s.
To like get used to the heat or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what they said. Whatever. It's freaking hot, right? We flew C-130s into Iraq and then took 7 tons out to our base camp.
So because how old are you at this point? Young 20, right?
Yeah.
What were you thinking, right? Sitting in that 7-ton driving out, Yeah, you boots on deck, and you've kind of trained
train that thought, and because you don't have all your gear that you're gonna work with, because you do what's called a left and right seat. I mean, you have your weapon, you have your pack, and everything you need, but you don't get your trucks and all that stuff until you start doing left seat, right seat with your battalion that you're trading out with, right?
Kind of turn everything
you're
over
doing
with them.
Yeah, you're doing a turnover. So you're in a 7-ton and you're with your dudes, and you're like, all right, hopefully I get there. Right? Because what happens is the offgoing battalion, they set what's called a picket, right? So what they do is they set a picket on your road coming down and protect you on your trip inbound. So yeah, there you're super vulnerable, right? You've trained all these things, you've trained these IED lanes, you train all this stuff, and you're sitting in there and you're like, I hope I make it, right? Hopefully we make it to this to wherever we need to go. So yeah, fear was a big thing. You fear the unknown. But it was, again, relying on those senior guys, telling you, you've seen the Forrest Gump where he's like, Forrest, check that hole. And you're like, yep, all right. And he jumps in it, right? That's what you did because you didn't know any better. And those guys had lived through it and they had seen it. And I had an understanding that if I did what they told me to do, I was going to be okay. So that first trip in was a little scary. You have 100 thoughts in your mind. Like, what happens if this happens? Do I have my gear right? Am I set up right? Are my boots tight? Like everything. So yeah, it was an anticipation of, okay, we've done all this stuff. Now we're here. Kind of a big deep breath. What's next? Right. What's next? Luckily nothing happened on that inbound, but it was like, you were constantly like, it was on like edge. Waiting, like, and that's when they say complacency kills. It's because you need to be on that edge and you need to be riding that freaking edge the whole time. Because when you don't, that's when something pops off and then you're not ready, right? So deployments like that were exhausting because you were just constantly just on edge, 24/7, getting ready, and then you would be, even in deployments, you would be involved in these firefights that seemed to last hours. Some of them would, but some of them were over 10, 15 minutes, and you're completely exhausted. You feel like you've been doing this for 4 or 5 hours. But it may have been that point, like, man, you've been on edge for so many weeks that you're like, okay, this is happening, and all your energy just goes 100 different ways. And where do I go? What do I do? So yeah, man, those deployments were mentally taxing because you were just always, if you were doing the right thing, you were always on that edge. You were always riding that line to go, right?
What is being in a firefight like, right? Because I mean, we watch movies, right? Movies are movies, right? Yeah. But like, is a lot of it just like suppressive fire, shooting in the direction you think they are? Are you shooting at the muzzle flashes you see? Yeah. I mean, I'm sure the time of day and all that plays into that, but like, is it like you see them, you're shooting at them, they see you, they're shooting at you? Like what? Like,
so they kind of progress based on how long you've been in country. So the first ones was like, you almost question yourself. Like, what am I doing? Should I be pulling this trigger right now? Like, am I doing this right? Am I throwing rounds at live people?
Right. Yeah, that's probably weird for the first time.
You know what I'm saying? Like that was like, oh, wow. But also you got to look at, so early in my first deployment, all I had was a pistol. All I had was a service pistol. Why? Because corpsmen are non-combatants. Right. And going through these firefights, and I'll explain that a little bit more after I tell the story. But they weren't, it was more me, I wouldn't say hiding, but just waiting for a Marine to go down, which kind of sucked, right? And I was like, man, I wish I could do more. Because, back then we're in a weapons company. So basically what weapons company's doing is we're driving around and we're just starting shit. Like, that's what we do, right? We're waiting for somebody to shoot at us, because we're in Humvees and we're, overwatching and we're doing certain types of mission sets. But I had a pistol and I was like, man, I wish I had a rifle. And I talked to First Sergeant Flegel, who is now, or he's retired or Sergeant Major. He was Sergeant Major of 4th. And I was like, hey, Sergeant Major, I need a rifle. He's like, Doc, you're a non-combatant. I was like, yeah, you're right. So I left, and we get in a few more firefights.
They don't know what that means.
Yeah, right. And I come back, and I had this wild idea in my head. I'm like, you know what? Watch this. So I'll go back to First Sergeant. I was like, hey, First Sergeant. I said, I need a rifle. He's like, Doc, we've already had this conversation. And I'm like, let's put it this way first. I said, before we deployed, we had a lot of medical stuff we had you do. He's like, yeah. He's like, what did we do? He's like, well, we had, the pre-deployment physicals, and then you gave us a bunch of shots. And I was like, yes, I gave you a bunch of shots, right? Why? It's like, so we don't get sick over here. Like, preventive medicine, right? He's like, yeah. I was like, so if I get a rifle and I shoot that guy before he shoots one of my Marines, is that preventive medicine? He was like, go get a rifle, Doc. So I went to the Army and I got a rifle. So after that, I was able, because also before that, after you have all these firefights, you have what's called expenditures, right? So they ask you for your expenditures of rounds, right? So we traveled with the Mark 19, which, if you don't know, it's basically a machine gun that shoots grenades. And we had the tow missile system that had a 240 Golf attached with it as a secondary weapon, and then we had the Modus, the 50 cal. We kept it up front. And at the end of a firefight, they'd be like, so many 100 rounds of 50 cal rounds, so many 100,000 rounds of 5.56, so many rounds of 40 Mike for your Mark 19, and it was always 39 mil rounds, because I would just pull my pistol out, like, bam, 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 right? And the thing is, like, I can't shoot. You got a 50-meter effective range, right. And I'm just like, I'm trying to like arc and stuff, and they would always be like, Doc, stop shooting your weapon. I was like, I can't, So once I got the rifle, I felt like I was like, all right. But so yeah, the firefights, some would be slow and some would be fast. To me, it was, and especially in those firefights, it was kind of two different points of view, right? So the firefights were after, I got the weapon. It was, I could be that Marine, right? I was always told as a corpsman, you're a Marine until something happens and you got to become Doc, right? You got to become a corpsman. And so I was, of course they had to like keep me away from being like the front man when we did CQB, like, Doc, you can't be the first guy in. Like, I was like, here we go. I got a weapon now. Here we go. So it got easier. It got easier, throwing rounds down range. It got easier having that understanding that I'm shooting at someone or at a person, right? Because for me, it became more of mission, right? I had a purpose, and that secondary purpose was my Marines, right? And then growing up, in Texas and with my family and having my mom being a single mom and all this, I was super protective, and that kind of went over into, that's why I joined medicine, right? Because my mother, right? Mm-hmm. Protection of people that are that need help and that are weaker than all, so that kind of just bled into it. Like it was a mission thing that I needed to do, and it got progressively easier, which is kind of scary too, right? Mm-hmm. Cause now, like, killing dudes wasn't hard. It was, I got to protect the guy to my left. I got to protect to my right. And sometimes it would get erratic, and sometimes, you would do stuff out of anger, based on what would happen to the guy to your left or right. And you had to kind of reel that in. But then there was the other side. There was the other side when a casualty did happen, right? And I don't know if I call it a gift. I don't know if I call it something that I can't even say that I learned. You ever seen a movie called not Field of Dreams, For the Love of the Game? It's got Kevin Costner. He's a pitcher. He pitches for for Detroit Tigers, and he's going into late in his career, and it's following through this whole game. He's pitching a perfect game, right? Well, he does a thing in the movie where he's got the crowd yelling at him and everything, and he says this one short phrase. He says, "Clear the mechanism," and everything goes away. I was able to do that when a casualty happened. I could just clear and focus right on what I needed to do. Right? I could pull things in when needed, like, hey, we need to move here, something needs to happen. But the clarity I had when I saw patients on the battlefield just came very naturally. And like I said, I don't know if that's it wasn't a trait I developed. It's just something that was instilled in me, like that, some people have it and some people don't, right? Some people, I remember being in a firefight and we were pinned down and QRF showed up, and they showed up from an MOG unit that was rolling through, and we had taken some casualties, and it was an HM2, and I was man, I don't even remember what rank I was. I was junior to him. I know that. And he comes in, and I got bodies everywhere, right? And I'm treating all these guys. And he comes in, he gets on his knees, and he just freezes. And I'm looking at him, like yelling at him. He's just like looking around, like, what is happening, right? And I take my Kevlar off, and we call it turtle fucking. I hit him on his Kevlar with mine. And I said, hey, we need to go to work. And he snapped out of it and just started going to work, which was awesome. Like that part sucked, but what was really cool afterwards was we had both learned the same medicine. Mm-hmm. So it was like art. Like we knew what the next thing was. Like we were like, you know, it made him like, you know, he couldn't clear it. Someone had to clear it for him. Hopefully, I'd never seen him after that. Hopefully, he was better.
Good.
but it was art, right? It was like we knew, boom, boom, this patient's done. Like it was awesome to see that as a corpsman that, you know, you can work together like that so proficiently. But yeah, firefights were just, and I know I'm kind of a little bit everywhere, and that's how my mind is. TBI. Hey, they were aggressive. They were, you know, carnal, if you could say a word. They were peaceful at times, but that was progressive through, right? And that's where they, you know, it comes in. You know, the difference between individuals that have seen that and the difference between individuals of that, like, and there's quotes out there. You know, I'm not good at my job because I'm violent. I'm good at my job because I've honed the violence that's been taught into me. Right. Yeah, it was wild, dude.
So for first deployment, I'm sure you remember it, but well, did you have your first casualty on that deployment?
Yeah. So yeah, my first casualty. My first KIA, I got the names tattooed on this arm. Raymond Romero. He was a kid out of California. Kind of looked like, if you ever seen the movie Lobotomy, Richie Valens. He was a cool kid. He had his hair slicked back, real quiet, but he had these kind of subtle jokes. So he was riding an Alpha vehicle, and just a day before that, we had got hit by an IED, and our Alpha vehicle gunner, his name was Jonas, rides at the door. He's now like a chief up in Montana. He's like a chieftain on the res. Great dude. We called him Horse.
Oh, like an Indian chief.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm thinking like Navy chief.
Like an Indian, right?
Gotcha.
His name, we called him Horse because his last name was Rides at the door.
Oh shit.
He had got rocked, and we had gone back to base because that vehicle had been trashed. We had to get another vehicle, and I had to tell him, I was like, "Hey, Horse," I was like, "Dude, you're down for this. You got to stay back. You know, you got a concussion. I can't have you on the gun." And he was like, "No, I want to go." And Romero was my gunner out of Delta vehicle, Delta vehicle, and he ended up taking Alpha vehicle, and we roll up to this intersection of Boston and Iron, and
so you're like in city. Or
outskirts of the city.
Okay.
So Boston and Iron. So MSR Iron ends up leading, or Boston ends up leading out to the base of TQ, where that's where all the main stuff from. That's a large base where everybody flies into, and they kind of feed in through Fallujah, right?
Okay.
And so we're out there, and there's a gas station at that intersection. Gas stations are different, right? It's like a building with like 5-gallon jugs out there. That's how they refuel. Super busy though, right? Because it's a place where, you know, things are going on. And we roll up there, and it's quiet. We're like, man, that's not right? So we roll up real slow, and Alpha vehicle kind of pulls up, and he's like, "All right, we're gonna go inspect it, right?" And there's always cans on the side of the road, and they roll up, and they're like, "Okay," and all of us are kind of like, "All right," kind of looking out the windows, you know, kind of looking at stuff. And Alpha vehicle rolls up right beside those gas tanks, and what had happened was they had put an anti-tank mine, which is shaped like a triangle, and they had put it to shoot through those gas cans. So when it went off, it blew right into Romero and just right through his neck. Done K. What also they had done was they had shaved soap into the gasoline. So when it exploded, it was like napalm
Fuck.
all over the fucking thing. So that was my first experience, right, with the KA like that. Not my first experience with casualty, but yeah, that one hit hard. That's probably one of my defining moments of my entire life, of how I built my character. Because I was rough. Like, that was a guy that I mean, we rode in, countless hours in that truck, bullshitting, having fun, eating, just embracing the suck together. And, having that first real, death was hard, right? It was hard on a lot of us, that had never experienced anymore. But it calloused us, right? We didn't know it calloused us until we took another one, right? We ended up taking 11 on that. So there was, out of that deployment, 20 people in my platoon, 17 of us got Purple Hearts. It was a rough deployment, man. Like, we got crushed. But it was, I mean, that calloused us, more than we knew, because then we took the next one, and it was hard, but it was like, okay. Like, everyone was hard, but it was like, all right, we got a job to do. Let's go back, right? And my wife kind of says it now, like I mean, she doesn't really mean it. Maybe she does. So she's like, you're kind of soulless, but I'm very, like, when things happen like that, like the death of my grandparent, like, I had grandparents die, and it's like, to me, it sucks, mm-hmm. But it's another day. Like, you got to keep pushing. There's more to live for. So it calloused us. Like, it didn't make us, soulless monsters, but it gave us the ability to, if we were always mad and angry and so sad and upset,
operate like that over there.
Yeah, you can't do that. And that's when I go back and I talk about those guys, and I didn't know why they were so mature and so hard, and so, this level that I hadn't seen before. It's because they had done the deployment before that and seen it. Mm-hmm. All right, they had been hit by mines and all this stuff that I had heard about later on. Because back then, our Humvees weren't up armored. I had canvas doors, mm-hmm. right, that was held on by 550 cord. I got in like Dukes of Hazzard style to get in, right? So, like, when you get rocked, you get rocked. But then, of course, later on deployments, they put up armor, didn't change the motor, so we got really slow. So we got rocked even more. Yeah, we didn't get, as much casualties because there was armor on it, but you talk about TBIs. Like, my platoon got blown up 25 times in one deployment. Like, my truck alone, 7. You know what I'm saying? Like, but that's just the way it worked. But the casualty, that sticks with me. Not my worst. Mentally, not my worst one. Even though I was calloused, I didn't feel it as bad. When we lost Scott and Dave, that one was rough.
Still his first deployment?
This is the next one.
Okay.
I can't remember. When we lost them, that one was rough. It was first. Yeah, okay, yeah. That one was rough. And I won't go into the way that it killed, because that one was pretty rough. But Dave was a buddy of mine, and we had gone to Havasu together, and we had gotten pretty close. And Havasu's Lake Havasu out of Arizona. If you're a young kid, don't ever go there for spring break. You'll have way too much fun, and you'll get in way too much trouble. But that one hit me real hard. That one was the one that's probably stayed with me the most out of all the years.
Marine or fellow corpsman?
Marines. Yeah, both Marines. That one was tough. Scott had a wife and a kid. Dave, his sister messaged me every year on his death just to say thank you and ask me how I'm doing. That was the toughest one.
Yeah. So you get back from your first deployment back to 29 Palms, I'm assuming, right? And Did you now see yourself as
that's hot shit,
those cornmen that you saw when you checked in for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because I had now seen what they had seen, and you know, you're like, people are like, how many firefights? I can't even remember, dude. There was so many of them that happened at that time, because especially rolling around and starting fights like we did, because that's kind of what we did. You know, they're not answers. First of all, they're not questions I want to answer, and they're not questions that I have an answer to. But yeah, it made us.
Were we still fighting the army at that point, or was that the insurgency already?
So we were in insurgency. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the thing that a lot of people didn't understand coming home, is that, Iraqi people were great. A lot of them were they were just scared, right? So you have these insurgents that come in and they're like, I'm going to kill your whole family if you tell them anything.
Right.
You wonder why they're not going to tell you anything. It's not because you would think, like, you've seen movies and all this stuff, like, oh, these are bad people, they're not telling us something because they're hiding something. They're not really hiding something. They just want to tell you nothing because they want to be dead. Right.
Yeah, I've had people on the podcast say, like, that, you know, we would go in these houses or like in like these compounds, and he's like, they're just having a family dinner, or like there's kids kicking a soccer ball, like, it's,
they're like, hey, sit down. They're like, sit down, have some chai, you know.
Right. But it's that fear that they lived under.
Yeah. So, but yeah, coming back, we did. We had that chip, and we were hard, right? We'd been to war. We had done what the Marines before hadn't done, right? Because, you know, years before that, they hadn't been doing all that.
Right.
And then, you know, we're it now, right? And we did kind of come up with our chests a little puffed out, and we were proud of it. We were proud of what we did as a team. We were proud of what we did as brothers, and but we knew it couldn't last long because we were going back, right? So we were going back.
And you said that's the deployment where you got your Purple Heart. Was that the first one?
Yeah.
You want to go into that, or?
Yeah. So same intersection. That was a rough one.
I meant to ask that before I.
Yeah. No, you're good.
Talk about coming back.
So same intersection. Except we were setting up an OP. We had
the gas station intersection.
Yeah, because it was an important intersection where you had to keep it open. You had to keep that transportation line because, you know, one of the MSRs leads out to Camp Green, where, you know, the recon guys were at. So you wanted to protect that MSR for their resupply, and then the other one was coming into Fallujah, where you want to keep the resupply of, you know, what's going on there.
Right.
So. A super important intersection. I mean, we were all over that intersection in one way or another, looking at it. So, yeah. So that one was. So we had pulled into what's called the Flower Factory, and we pulled there several times. This wasn't the first time we pulled in this OP, and it was it was just a 4-walled open thing, right, with like some garages over here. And we would set up in the corners, and we'd have our fields of fire, and we'd be able to overwatch, you know, that intersection. Then we'd have our vehicles watching our backs and our lefts and right and all that stuff. So we had been in there. We had several times. And what had happened was they had gone in there. The insurgents had gone in there, and they had set a pressure plate. Right, so they had stacked these anti-tank rounds and 155s on top of each other, and then they had put a pressure device on it. So from there, they put sand over it, right? And then what happens is that you keep pushing sand until one little thing's popped up, right? So we had gone in and out of there several times. We had parked and we had doing that, and we were like, hey, let's go ahead and move to our next position. And our tire was sitting right on it. And we rolled over, and then boom, happens, right? I don't remember anything after that. I don't remember until I woke up in the hospital. From what I know happened after that, because I got told later from my lieutenant, and I saw pictures that had peeled our Humvee top like an old tuna can. It had peeled it open. Had thrown our gunner out. Trujillo was his name. It had knocked out our driver and then our vehicle commander. So I get out, I make sure the vehicle commander's okay. I go around, I pull the driver out to safety. I get Trujillo. I set up a CCP. I set up triage. I tell the lieutenant the triage what we need to do, call in birds, all this other stuff. And then he said I passed out. I don't remember any of that.
Damn.
Which goes back to like the easiness of what it is. As long as you know it, right? Like I wasn't even there, but I was there. And that was scary, right? Waking up and like lights in my face, like, whoa.
I always heard this was a bad thing.
Right? Like, what is happening right now? Like, where am I? Right? And so, you know, things happen and procedures happen. And the next day, the general comes in and he's like, hey, just want to talk to you guys. You know, thank you for what you've done. And I'm like, cool, man. And he's like, you talked to your folks yet? And I was like, no. He pulls a sat phone out of his pocket. He's like, call your mom right now. I was like, okay. So I called my mom. Thank goodness I did. Because my mom got a phone call that night. And all they said, hey, is this your son's name? And they say, yes. Just so you know, your son was hit by a rocket. And my mom, who's a very spicy, short Mexican woman, is like, I'm flying to Iraq, right? And I call her. I was like, no, you know, I'll go into details when I get home, but I'm okay. I'm all right. I'll
don't come to Iraq.
Don't
Mom.
come to Iraq. Yeah, I got hurt, but I'm okay. So yeah, that was a crazy moment. And weird thing is when I woke up, again, town of 516 people, right? I wake up in my corpsman that's attached to me in the field hospital there. When I was a senior, Mike Kelly was a junior in high school, and he was my corpsman.
Oh, so someone from your small town?
From my small town.
Oh, wow.
He's now a chief at Great Lakes at RDC. He's in RDC.
Oh, very cool.
Mike Kelly. I was like, Mike, I thought I was dreaming. I was like, Mike's doing here. He's like, what's up, dude? And I'm like, he's like, you're all right, you know. And I was kind of freaking out, but it was weird. Like my small town of like nobody was joining the military. That you know, had a guy. I'm a great friend of mine. We knew each other, and I was like, man, I know this guy. That was pretty cool.
That's cool. That's very cool. So, all right. So you get back right from that first deployment, and how fast did you go on that next one?
6 months.
Back to Iraq, or
back
did you
to
go
Fallujah,
Afghanistan?
man.
Okay.
Back to Fallujah. Right. It was back doing the same thing. It was nothing had changed. Yeah, we got some new trucks and we had got some new SOPs. But it was the same thing, man. We're doing a little bit different stuff. We're doing some censuses of some towns, and you know, because you're always looking for the military age males, and what we were really trying to do there is build up the operational security forces of Iraq internally, right? So we're trying to train those guys and get those guys spun up to protect their own, right?
Right.
So the SOPs and the mission hadn't really changed, right? And that was the thing about when I look back on what the Marine Corps and learning about the history of the Marine Corps, of how they were so littoral and island hopping and always on the offensive. We were in a defense, like we were just waiting for people to shoot at us, and I didn't really see it till then. I'm like, man, why are we always just waiting? You know, I mean, we had to set up in houses, and now we got some of our other platoons getting blown up by vehicle-borne IEDs that are driving into their pods because they're sitting there waiting for stuff to happen. And nothing against you. That's the Army's job. That ain't Marine Corps' job. There's a reason why when people are like, oh, the Marines are here. Oh shit, we're about to die, right? So yeah, it was a defensive war, and then we just got the added on, like, hey, let's train some of these Iraqi forces. And again, you're too young back then to really know what's the mission. Really, in hindsight, that's 2020. You fulfill a mission based on what's required by, right? If I'm doing a census, if I'm doing an OP, if I'm doing an ECP to look for vehicles or individuals that are hiding IDs. What is my purpose? Really, my purpose was to defend the guy to the left or right because I was told to go somewhere,
right? And
so were they. So yeah, it didn't change, and the next one didn't change. That was it. It was that's all we did, and fighting a defensive position like that it's hard, and that's why that's why we kept getting hit. We kept getting, blown up. Dudes kept fucking dying. I'm not gonna say that's why, but I felt like it. Like I felt like, man, we're always on the defense and we're just waiting for somebody to pop some shots at us or drive up with a truck and drop a mortar and drive away. Like it was tough to kind of see that, and you didn't realize that until, because your first deployment you're just wide eyed and
right,
but then you start discovering things like, I mean, we were in a hotel one time and with Fox Company, and we were going there for a resupply for fuel or something, and we got chlorine bombed. Like it was miserable. Like you couldn't breathe. But we were just sitting here in a pause waiting, and then stuff like that could happen. Luckily, there was an HM2 Sergal. He was huge, right? This guy was freaking massive, and we couldn't breathe. And he just put his Kevlar on and ran through a freaking wall so we could get out of the room that we were in, so we could breathe some fresh air. I think he's a chief somewhere now. Somebody had told me about it. But yeah, like just sitting in those defensive positions, now that I think about it, was like, man, why? And then yeah, we did Fallujah, and we took Fallujah, and that was our ground, and we were doing good things out of there. And then you hear years ago, now they just give it back. Like you're like, man, I spent like 2.5 years of my life trying to get that piece of ground, and you're just gonna, here you go, dude.
Hand him back.
Yeah. So yeah, those follow-ons were just kind of, it was rinse and repeat. I mean, a lot of things had changed with our what we couldn't do. Like first deployment's kind of like the Wild West. We just shoot, right? And then it was like, hey, if you're going to use your big guns inside the city, you got to call and ask for permission. Call for permission? And they're like, oh, and also you can't have warning shots, and you can't shoot pop-ups. You got to throw these beanbags at them. And you're like, what is happening right now?
I don't mean to laugh, but that's wild.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It was.
What do you think was, just because you're in populated areas with so many civilians, or
you know what? Maybe that's part of it, because there were individuals and when you have a war like that, there are going to be individuals that die that they aren't supposed to do that, right? And I don't know if it was just a winding down of that, or if it was winning the hearts and minds,
right,
which is important.
Yeah, for sure. Especially in that mission set that we were, where we're not fighting uniforms, right?
Yeah, and also, I mean, and this is just me spitballing, and I don't know if there's any factuality behind it, but the access to information, right? People started knowing what was happening, right? You got to look in the early 90s and in the late 90s, right? All your information was based on the news and newspapers. There's no access to the internet. You're not Googling and seeing, like, now, like, people are like, oh, did you hear about what happened here? And you have 3 million views in the next hour.
Bro, I was listening to something. I forgot like the time frame of like the statistic, but it was like over like 93% of like the. I think it was actually about Afghanistan, not Iraq. So this kind of doesn't really apply, but like 93% of like the civilians there like didn't even know 9/11 happened. Like they didn't like understand like why we were like even there. Yeah, I mean kind of going back like to the information thing.
Yeah.
Like the Afghan people didn't even know 9/11 was a thing.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't know it happened.
Yeah, now the access to information is just it's a little crazy. And I think it's leading to a lot more problems.
Yeah, it's probably a whole other podcast.
Yeah, that's another podcast.
All right, so because your lengthy resume of division,
yeah,
I'm sure we could spend hours talking about deployments.
Absolutely.
But what are some other things that you did in your career? In between those tours of operational duty.
Yeah. So after that, I kind of just kept deploying for about 7 years. Right, kind of just kept going.
Was seashore not really a thing in time of war?
It was, but
you didn't have to do it?
There was a lot of IAs, right? There was a lot of individual augmentees, and I got put in some positions where I didn't. Let's rewind right back to Buds, right? So after you leave, you can go back 2 years later, and I had really thought about doing it because, right, I talked earlier how I thought it was a failure on mine.
Let yourself down kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. But why didn't I go back? And I can openly say this: I fell in love with war. There is no drug, and I don't know. I'm not an expert on drugs, so I haven't used a whole bunch of them. Of course, when I was young, people smoke pot and things like that. But I can't imagine a drug that's more exhilarating than war. the adrenaline, just the pump, just the overall like just
real life Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, you know, just like, man, it's and like an internal yelling of the masses in your head. Like it's so invigorating, and it's so you can't explain it, right? And then you have that with a group with like-minded individuals that are feeling the same thing, and you feel like no one understands that except for those group of individuals. Because when you come back home, you're like, and you see people from high school, and you're like, man, who are you? Like, what are you doing with your life? Right? Or you'd be like, oh, you're successful, but why didn't you do this? I'm over here. You know, like I got guys in that's like, and it was just like, with the having the like-minded individuals and all of us thinking the same way, it was just, I loved it. Like, it was like this ultimate family that just, we had been through this and that. And I was married, right? I had gotten married. And I had a wife at home, but it was still, I would come home and I wanted to go back, even though you're like, man, when you're there, you're like, man, I can't wait to go home. Like, you get back and you're like, I mean, I remember there'd be times I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, where's my rifle? Like, and my ex-wife would be like, dude, you're home. Right. I mean, there was a time I stayed at my brother's house and a thunderstorm happened and I jumped through his window, like, cause I thought, things were happening. Right. But I loved it. And I mean, it's hard to explain now. And I talk to, I can say that I see therapy and I seek that, not only for that PTSD, but also for my TBI, for my injuries. But I can never explain it. Like, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with everything about it. I fell in love with the workups. I fell in love with, even if it sounds weird, I fell in love with having the power of throwing rounds down range and doing something for a country that I love. So I never wanted to go back because I felt like I was doing it already. I felt like I didn't need to go. Kudos to those guys. Those guys have done. I know a lot of SEALs, and I know a lot of guys that have done it. Kudos to them. But I felt like I was already doing it, in a way. Yeah.
You could see how it's an addiction, right? It's like a. You could almost say it's like a weird form of like gambling, right? Like you know the risk, right? Yeah. And what that risk is, right? But you still. Yeah, you still do it and you still chase it, right?
Yeah,
you still,
and that was also another thing back then is like everywhere you went and there was corpsmen that were around your rank and age group. It was like we'd all kind of done the same thing, right? We all, so you could build that camaraderie kind of no matter where you went.
That's very cool.
Because like the next, after I've done all that for those years, my ex-wife was like, hey. Can we go somewhere where you're not going to play?
I would like to see you.
Yeah, right. And I was like, yeah. So I was up for sea duty. So I went to Type 2 sea duty out of Bridgeport, California. I was gone more as a mountain instructor there probably than I was when I was doing my deployments. Like gone. And there's that, I can understand now when she was like, hey, I'm leaving. Cool. I get it. Right. But Bridgeport was its own. Man, that was its own thing. It was awesome.
Where is? I always hear you talk about Bridgeport at work and stuff. Where is that?
So Bridgeport is about an hour southeast of Lake Tahoe. Okay. Up in the Sierra Mountains.
Okay.
So base housing is about 7 miles from Nevada border. You're about 40-minute drive into base up the mountain. Base camp somewhere around 6,500 feet, and you just teach. I was the chief instructor for mountain medicine and cold weather medicine from 2011 to 2015. So I did a 4-year tour there. It was a 3-year and an extended a year. I loved it. And really when push comes to shove, I was also an IQC instructor. But really you taught wilderness medicine. Everything was a big boys club, right? Everyone was kind of on a first name basis. It was just like you're grown men doing grown ass work up in the mountains, right? And then
was there any kind of prerequisites to get that billet, or did you?
Yeah, just be a FMF corpsman.
Oh, okay.
Right, but you have to do things before you're able to teach, right? So when you get there, day one, right? Day one, you have to do a PFT. So a Marine Corps PFT, pull-ups, crunches, and a 3-mile run. So they have, the way the Marine Corps runs it, they have first class, second class, third class PRT. First class is you have to score a certain amount to get that, and it's the highest one, right? You have to score first class PFA or PFT, but they don't so also PFAs and PRTs in the Navy are adjusted if you're at altitude. Mm-hmm. They're also adjusted if you're at age, right? There, it's unadjusted. You're running like you're an 18-year-old kid at sea level. And if you don't pass it out of first class, you go away. Needs of the Navy. Gone. Right? That's day one. So you're already like, oh, crap. Right? So this is going to be tough. And then to be an instructor, corpsmen don't go to mountain leadership course unless you go out there as instructor. So you got to go through winter mountain leader course. So I've been through some pretty tough courses. This one was probably the hardest mentally, because you go out at one point for immersion phase was like 20 days, and you're just out in the snow walking around for miles and miles and miles and doing operations and building shelters, and you're cold and you're wet for days. Right? And but you're learning a bunch of tactics of how to be a mountain leader, and how to do weather, and how to do shelters, and how to do patrols, and how to build your track plans, and how to operate, and how fast you can move, and all these sorts of things, right? So that one was super tough. And then you have summer mountain leaders where it's like all technical. It's like rock climbing. Oh, also in the winter you got to learn to ski. So if I never skied a day in my life. They take you to Mammoth Mountain. You stay in a resort for a week. You have 1 week to pass the ski test, the mountain ski test. If you don't, you're gone, right?
Jesus.
And so you just skied, right? And you do that every year. Well, then summer comes along, and you have to learn rock climbing, rappelling, building of systems, how to survive out there, how to shelter, and all that stuff in the summertime. And they're both about 2.5 months long. If you can pass both of those, now they give you what's called your red hat, and you're now a mountain warfare instructor, and then you can start teaching classes up there.
And those are the courses you teach, are the ones you just went through essentially?
So you had to go through mountain leaders, because that was like the big one. I taught
like different tiers of it.
I taught cold weather and mountain medicine, so it was a little bit of that, and then introduction of medicine in the wilderness.
Gotcha.
Right. So we did a lot of our stuff on WMS, Wilderness Medicine Society, and we taught a lot of that curriculum of wilderness medicine, which is easy too, because it's medicine just in the wilderness. There's just altitudes involved, and more hypothermia, more environmental injuries, and stuff like that. But that place is a gem. I love it.
I've never heard of it until I met you.
Yeah, I loved it. Like your backyard was the Sahara Mountains. Like that was your backyard. That was your office. That was your playground.
What kind of base is it? Like what branch?
It's a Marine Corps base.
Marine base.
Yeah, it's a Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center.
Is that where Sierra West is, or no?
Ooh, that's in Cali. That's in Southern Cali.
Oh, okay.
So, but yeah, it was just a fun course. I mean, I learned tons, right? I got to do what's called National Search and Rescue Academy. I got to pilot that and build it. Went through the first program, and then I taught it afterwards, where we taught with the Department of Interior, Park Rangers, taught them paramedic, EMT, swiftwater rescue, advanced swiftwater rescue, long lining, slack linings,
integrated stuff.
Yeah, but they just integrated because we had the place to do it all.
Gotcha.
So we did that. I got to do human traffic, like not human trafficking, like tracking, like how to track humans.
Gotcha.
Like I got card, like I ended up being a part of the volunteer service for El Dorado County. They would call me up like, hey, 80-year-old lady just went off trail. She's been gone for a day. I need you to track her. Cool. So I go out there and track. And then like the next day, they'd be like, hey, you're one of the only guys in the area that's short line, long line qualified. I need to fly you out here, and you got to go do a rock rescue real quick. Boom.
So it was like a search and rescue corps.
Yeah, man. I was like, I was all over the place. It was a lot of fun. But that was a huge personal. So my professional life had kind of always been going, running and gunning, doing all these fun things and enjoying my life on that side. That's when my personal life took a huge hit, right? That's, my divorce was massive, right? That one was, like I said before, my dad had died when I was very young in prison, so he was never there. So I always told myself, like, man, when I'm a father, I'm not going to leave my kid. Like, right. So my divorce happened. I was like, whoa, like my kid's gone. Right. Because being in the military, you're not, unless something dramatically happens,
Correct.
Yeah. And I had to make some kind of crazy decisions. Like I had orders to SEAL Team 1 they were opening up spots because we told them, like, hey, we have all this mountain experience. You're sending us to a hospital and we're wasting it. They're like, cool, man, we'll start sending you to the units. I canceled those and I went to Springfield, Missouri to a NOS INI so I could be close to my kid. Right. So I took sacrifices in my career, and then little things that you don't really recognize. Right. Like I'd come home from work. I'm like, man, where's that fairy who used to cook me dinner and wash my clothes? Like I got to learn how to grow up. Right. So I had to kind of grow up there. And then luckily, I had a guy, his name's Matt Black. He's a retired first sergeant, my best friend. He's a godparent to all my kids.
Is he the one that pinned you?
Yeah, he's the one that pinned me.
Chief?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was one of my neighbors. And I told him because I was devastated through my divorce. I knew why it happened and when it happened, and the reasons why. But it was still like another thing that I failed, right? And I took failure really hard because I expect perfection, and that's kind of been tough with me through my life, expecting perfection because early in your career, if you're not perfect, people die, right? So everything needed to be perfect. So that was my personal life's not perfect. And I told Matt, I said, hey, dude, I need you to watch out for me, dude. I was like, if I don't have somebody to help me, I'm going to end up being in the bottle. And I'm not going to know how to get out. So what he would do is I'd come home from work and I'd be tired. We'd all be tired because he was the mountain leader chief instructor. Now I was the mountain medicine chief instructor. And I'd come home and I'd hear on my door. I'm like, and I'm like, come in. I know it's Matt. Half the time he wouldn't even knock. And I'd be laying on my couch because my ex I gave her all this shit. I was like, I don't want anything. Just I'll have a couch, have a TV. I'm chill. And he'd come in and be like, hey, Pants. He calls his wife Amanda. Calls her Pants. He's like, hey, Pants, cook dinner. Let's go. And I'd be like, nah, dude. He's like, get off the couch. You already have a plate. Come eat. So it was like every day I was going over there. And he's got 2 kids, Addie and Jesse, and they were little. Now they're big. I mean, one of them's probably, I think she's a junior in high school. And they became like my family, right? They became somebody who watched over me. And then what was really cool about Amanda was there was times like I'm single. Right. I'm like single, ready to mingle. Right. and I would go over there and Amanda would be like, hey, you can't let Steve go out by himself. So me and Matt would just go out. But again, we'd keep each other out of trouble that way too. Cause he's kind of cut out of the same cloth, like I said, I have a lot of acquaintances, but I have very few friends. Matt is one of my few friends I have. Like I'm calling you up and I'm like, dude, I need you to help me bury a body. And he's like, whose car are we taking? Right.
Right.
So he would go out and we'd watch. He was a beacon of light that helped me out in a super dark time. And we've been able to help each other out. He had a real tough retirement and because he had just left MARSOC. And so we kind of just, every time we talk, we talk probably once a week. And when I lived in Lejeune, we had family dinners every Sunday. So having a person like that in my life was super important personally after that had happened because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what kind of a man I wanted to be. I knew who I wanted to be, but I didn't know how to do it.
How to get there.
Yeah.
For sure. So you leave Bridgeport. You said you went to the NOS there. I'm sure that was a huge
that was
from
rough.
Iraq to
I was the
mountain
only
medicine.
active duty guy there.
Yeah.
Right. And then plus now you got to look. This was 2005. So I had been a first class for 3 years. So yeah, not you kind of put it on.
2005.
2005. No, for 4 years.
Okay.
Because I picked it up in 11.
Okay.
Oh no, sorry, 2015. That's
Okay.
when I went there. Sorry. Yeah, 2015.
Forgot the one.
Yeah, I forgot the one. Carry the one. Yeah.
Like I said, I wasn't first in 2 years.
Like I said, I wasn't very good in school. Well, I made third. I got combat meritorious to the third. I was only E3 for a month.
Oh, wow.
And they capped me, right? I ended up also getting capped to 6, right? So I show up there, and it was like, you know, I try to be humble, but when you walk into a place like that, wearing that much color on you, on your chest, people start asking questions, right? So I try to influence them as much as I could, and it kind of built a soft spot because I was also there with I&I, the 323 Weapons Company, and helped out with the NOSC. So that continued my green side, right? I kept that was my continuation with the Marines. But it kind of built a soft spot with the reserves, right? Because what's the reserves' purpose? The reserves' purpose is to be ready when everything kind of goes crazy and the active duty need help, right? So that was my constant mission, is to whoever I met, and it also introduced me to different rates that I had never been introduced to before. It was kind of like Corpsman and RP, and then a little bit of PS and PN before the whole admin thing had changed, right? And so it was my introduction to kind of them, but it was always like, I always try to maintain that mission, like, or that mindset, like mission focused. Like, I get it, you got family at home. I get it, you only come here once a month. I get it that you only have 29 days of training per day. I get all that, but I drove home like, your purpose is to be ready at all times, right? And that's kind of that kind of just affected me, and living that sort of mission mindset to prepare them, kind of made me always think about things like even now, like the way some of the direction that the services are going. I feel like the Navy, right, especially here, to a point, have forgotten why we were built. Like, sorry for people that are hearing this, we were built to fucking kill people. Right? That's our purpose, to defend this great nation, right? And I think we've forgotten that. And that's kind of what I wanted to influence when I was there, was like, you have a mission. When you go on it, you better be ready for it. Because if you're not, this is what's going to happen, right? And I would tell them some stories about my background. So yeah, that place was different. It was kind of cool though on the other side, because there's no base there. So it's like a building in the middle of the city. So you could be like a civilian in the world, and then you could work there. Also, where I met my wife now, Ashley, best person I've ever met in my entire life. Yeah, she's 9 years young. She's 9 years younger than me, but she has like a 65-year-old mental. Like she's just always thinking ahead. Like, we have a running joke in our house, like if something's missing, ask my wife or ask mom. I'm like, hey, if she doesn't know, it's lost forever.
It's gone. Right?
But she like knows, like, I'm looking for something. She's like, oh yeah, it's here. I haven't seen it in like 6 months. And like, I will go exactly there. Right. But she is, and I'll find it. But man, she has done so much for me. It took that time to grow personally after my unsuccessful marriage or failing, like I said, that had happened. And for me to build myself, and to watch Matt and how Matt and Amanda worked out, and how my brother and my sister-in-law, who have been together since they were teenagers, watching them and kind of, being home enough to see it, had now turned into, now I know what I need and know what I want. So when I met my wife, she had also gone through a divorce with the Marine, that was pretty tough on her. But the thing is when you don't really realize, until afterwards, but marriage is a puzzle, right? And we're always looking, and the pieces of the puzzle that we're looking for isn't always what we need, right? Everybody's looking, man, I want her to be hot, I want her to have giant jugs, I want her to be, let me do this and let me do that. Right. That's the puzzle we try to build, right? Mm-hmm. But when we met and we started together, it was we now knew these pieces of each other, and we knew these pieces of ourselves, and those pieces she was missing in her previous marriage, I had them, and I wanted to give them to her. And the pieces that I was missing in my previous marriage, she had them, and she wanted to give them to me. And it just worked, man. It's like we talk a lot, and we see struggles in people's lives and relationships, and we always say, man, like, how many marriages do you think people are this happy? Like, I can honestly say that about my marriage. Like, I don't know, because man, it's great. She's awesome. She's there for me all the time. She keeps me in check. She understands when I'm being an asshole, but then on the other hand, I can tell her when she's, being a B word or whatever. But communication was a big thing on that one. But yeah, she's awesome. I can't say anything better or more about her. And she understands her dad's a retired Marine, medically retired. So she gets that. She grew up. She was in Okinawa, so she gets the moving. She understands it all. And then she was married to a Marine, and the main reason why it didn't work is because he had PTSD and didn't know how to work with it, right? So having that knowledge, man, just kind of fit. We were doing really well.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Now, I mean, look at my house. I got all these kids. I got 4 kids.
Cool, man. I mean, we're at 2 hours.
Oh,
that's what I love about these things. I feel like we just sat down. I mean, and honestly, I feel like we probably didn't even. I mean, we went from high school to like your first deployment early, and then
man,
and then kind of
I can
breeze
come
over
back.
the rest. Absolutely, man. But I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
I appreciate your mentorship.
Yeah, I expect a part 2.
For
right?
sure.
Because maybe I'll come with some questions, and we can kind of have an interaction with each other. Like, what do you think about this? And we can kind of feed off of that maybe another time.
I like it.
Maybe I'll give you 11 freaking questions.
General questions. But as always, I appreciate your time. Right, it's the weekend, your family at home, right, and you took your time out to come do this with me. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate your mentorship at work. Obviously, you're definitely every command. You always try to pick 1 or 2 people that you want to stay in contact with, right? And you're already on my list, and I'm still here for another 1.5 years. So
me too. I'm retired.
So man, just thank you. And until next time.
Yeah, man. I look forward to it.
Yeah, brother.